Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and creator of the Salesology prospecting method. And I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, my very, very, very special guest is Stephanie Valenti. And she is a 4-time executive leader leading B2B organizations ranging from $10 million in revenue to over $1 billion in revenue. And she is passionate about go-to-market growth and scaling sales organizations for optimal human and business results. And what I really love about this introduction is that Stephanie included the word human in there with business results. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Wendy, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Cannot wait for the conversation.
Okay, well then let's get going. Let's begin at the beginning, which is where I always begin. Tell us your story. What's the background? How did you end up at 4-time executive leader leading B2B organizations?
Yeah. It all starts with a journey, right? So I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I started in restaurant while I was going to school and grew in restaurant really quickly, got all of these different roles from server to bartender to assistant manager, and even went to corporate office in restaurant. And someone looked at me once and they said, "You really should be in sales. Like, you're so competitive and hungry and you always want to learn more. Like, you really should give it a try." And that's how my career started, right? I got into B2B sales in my mid to late 20s. So I didn't start right out of school. I was doing business development, outside sales, and just fell in love with the notion of, if you work harder and you put effort in, you can make more money. Kind of fell in love with that. I also fell in love with the fact that I always knew that I was a leader. I was a leader in sports. I was a leader in school. And so coupling those two things together, I started that sales career in Fortune 100, soaked up anything and everything I could from coaches. And every 2 years or so was always asking, what was next? What was next? Right? And so throughout my career, I took a lot of risks. I raised my hand when someone asked me to do something, and that allowed me the opportunity to be able to continue to build over the years and ultimately end up leading sales and operational organizations. So that's a very consolidated summary of my history, but that about sums it up.
Okay. So I'm curious about this idea of scaling, because a lot of people talk about it, but what does it actually mean and how do you do it? Because I meet so many business owners that are kind of like, they're stuck in the same place for a really long time. And they say they want to grow, but they're not.
Yeah. Growing's hard. Growing and scaling comes with hard decisions and doing things differently than the way that you've done them to get where you are today. And not very many people are comfortable with that. And so there is stagnation that happens a lot. You know, if I think about, I go back to a 3-step process every time I come into an organization and they say they want to scale. That thought process starts with structure. Right? What is the structure we need for this business to grow? And I'm not just talking about organizational structure in a hierarchical sense of the word. I'm talking about structure in roles and responsibilities. I'm talking about structure in go-to-market. I'm talking about structure as a whole. So truly taking away that human element for a minute, not thinking about the minutia that actually rolls up, but really focusing in on the structure. What does the business need to get to the next step? I'd then like to dive into process. Okay, we know what the structure should be. How do you actually put process on top of that structure to show that it's actually actionable? And then lastly, looking at the humans that you have and associating those humans back into that process, into that structure that ultimately can lead to success. And why such a simple methodology is so difficult for some people, at least from what I've seen in my history, is people often start with the people first. And not that it's wrong to recognize your humans first, but building a structure and a process for the people that you have in place generally is a bit of a recipe for disaster. You need to build the business and then put the people in it, not the other way around.
That's really interesting to me when you talk about structure and then process to achieve that next step. Don't you have to figure out what the next step is before you start putting anything in place?
Yeah, so really understanding big picture, that big, hairy, audacious goal, right? The BHAG. What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? Those big strategy, business plan, almost pie in the sky conversations absolutely need to happen. But what I've found is those aren't often lacking. You go into a startup, they've got all the ideals in the world, right? They know they want to be $100 million company someday, and they want to compete with blank, or they want to go to IPO, right? There's always those big goals, but thinking about how you do that and how you get there is where I start to implement that 3-step strategy. Now, to your point, Wendy, you absolutely have to okay, we want to be 100 million. Let's start knocking down, where do we start and how do we make this a bit more granular? How do we think about year one? What would success look like? And then building to that. But that's another faux pas, right? Is building for 1 year instead of the bigger picture so that it's something that's actually scalable. So much reoccurring change management and volatility happens in scaling businesses, or businesses that at least want to scale, because they're building for the moment and not the end result. And so that's why I do like starting with that BHAG, if you will. So great point.
Okay, so you're putting a structure in place for the BHAG. I never heard that before, by the way.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that. So you're starting out by putting the structure in place for the BHAG.
Yes. Yeah, because otherwise, and it doesn't have to be perfect right now. You can have holes of future state roles, future, this, and working backwards. So during my last role, in a role I was consulting a bit for, I said, okay, you want to be 23 locations. What does that look like? What would the structure look like for a 23 location business? And now let's work backwards. What would it look like at 11? What would it look like at 6? And how do you then build for that future today, so that every single day you're not grossly changing structure and hierarchy and things all the time, which creates disruption, which creates chaos, which is just another human element that you have to manage when you should just be focusing on growth.
What if the people that are running the company are the ones creating the chaos?
That's a whole nother podcast we could do, Wendy, right? I think that's generally what happens. But if you can get somebody in there to really commit to this methodology of structure first, and so another example, let's say that you have a first-time VP of sales, and they're the only person really selling today. Right? The CEO and maybe it's the CEO and the founder need to sit together to say, do we think that this VP of sales can scale with us into the future? Is this somebody we can up level that can manage hundreds of people when we're $100 million company? Or is this truly just an unbelievable rock star individual contributor that has a title today that we will have to backfill in the future? That's when you get to that people element, that people step. You're evaluating your talent to see if they can fit into your future scale, or if they are going to move into a different role as you scale. And how do you manage that today in the appropriate way, so it doesn't hit you in the face 3-4 years from now and you're like, oh, what do we do with this person? Right? It's this proactive nature of managing what's to come, and how do we set ourselves up for success?
So I hear you saying step one, the structure, put it in place for the BHAG.
Yeah.
Even if you have to backfill it later.
Yep.
And then how do you figure out what your process is for those smaller goals along the path?
Yes. You cannot, there's no way that for the BHAG, you can say these are all the processes that we're going to have in the future, right? Almost impossible. But if we narrow this down to, let's just say sales, then the process decision could be something like, we know in order for us to hit this BHAG with this structure, we're going to need a tool for our team. And we haven't invested in a tool that's scalable with us as we head towards that $100 million goal. So we're going to go ahead and implement something like a Salesforce or a HubSpot, right? And how do we want to set that up for the future, not just for today, but what are the big decisions like definitions of the fields or properties that are going into our system? How do we make those decisions now so that we don't have to change the whole system and have an entire team or consulting group come in and redo the entire thing when we get to the 100 million mark? So when I talk about process, I'm talking about making really good decisions for long-term process and documenting what those processes should be now so that they can simply lightly evolve, not completely change as you grow as a company.
I'm dying to ask you about do's and don'ts because I see that there could be pitfalls along this path. And I actually have seen pitfalls along the path, for our business, for clients' businesses. So, what are some of the things? I mean, we've kind of been talking about the do's.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that can go wrong and the don'ts? Like, don't do this.
Yeah. A lot of the don't do's are simply the opposite of some of the do's that I've shared. So, something as simple as implementing a tool with like a CRM, for example, and not identifying the way that it should be used and the data that should go in and definitions of properties that will be discussed and used on dashboards in the future. Often I hear, oh, it's a small team. We all speak the same language. It's fine. But that's not the case, right? When a company's scaling, it grows fast. You hire the next 5 people and they don't get the definition document because it was never created. And so they assume that this means this, and the whole thing starts to fall apart with dirty data. That's a very small example on the process side. The people side goes so much deeper, right? What I've seen founders and small organizations do is they say, let's just go hire a really, really strong person. We'll figure out their role later. That doesn't work well, right? And you're in scale mode. It's okay when you're in founder land, right? Or small business land, but scale doesn't work for that person if it's not really discussed. So where do we feel like this person's strengths are? And do we have a box for them? Right? Is there a box in the org based on what we need that they fit into, or are we just hiring this person and we think we can just float them around to meet our business needs in the future? That's also a mistake.
Yes. And I see that a lot hiring salespeople where the company hires someone that they think has, I'm making finger quotes here, the gift of gab, or
yes.
She's a people person,
Yes.
And that doesn't always work that well. Could you talk a little bit to that? Fitting, having that structure in place for if you're going to hire salespeople, having the structure in place for them.
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this topic, especially in just sales structure strategies, roles, the psychology between the different humans that go into different sales roles. And something that comes to mind for me on this one is hiring that one person that says that they can truly do it all in sales. And they're running from the cold calling prospect all the way through to client management, upsell, and beyond. And if you have to do that with one person because you're, just getting started, 100% understand, right? There's budget restrictions, there's reasons you need to do things. But just know that one person is actually like one of the 3 things that you just hired for, right? So in the psychology of business development versus account management, right? That business development natural hunter, I like to call them lions because I'm one myself. But it's the animal I most closely identify with. But they love the thrill of the kill. They don't have great attention to detail. They're competitive. They want to go out there and they want to get what's next. And they also like a lot of, recognition and small wins, right? So take that person and now tell them they need to be an account manager. An account manager, I call them zebras, right? Because they really enjoy relationships. They want to hear from their client, who their grandma is and what their relationship is like with them. They like to move slow. They see long-term gains in the relationship and they enjoy slowly growing over time. So take that ultra competitive person, have them also manage a book of business, right? Or take the person that's the zebra and make them do lion work. I'm not saying people can't do both, but long term, they are going to do what they prefer with more tenacity and more allocation of time than they would if you just separated the roles. So I'm a big believer in making sure when you're starting to build structure, you have a hunter and then you have a farmer and they work together and that's fine. And you remove any barriers of handoff, but ultimately that is something that you want to strive towards.
I love this topic. And we're going to pause here for a moment for a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, I'm going to hold my guest, Stephanie Valenti, I'm going to hold her feet to the fire and dive a little bit more deeply into this hunter versus farmer dynamic, because I see it screwed up all the time. So we're going to talk about it. Now, a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. So what we've done is we've taken all of those gifts and we put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts, and we add another gift every week. We release the podcast on Monday, and every Monday when we release the podcast, we add a gift. So you can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. The link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. You'll be glad you did. And now we are back with my special guest, Stephanie Valenti, and we are talking about hunters and farmers. So let's talk about a little bit about the process. Maybe you can speak to how you determine whether someone is a hunter and a farmer or a farmer, and what you need to have. You know, we've been talking about structure.
Yeah.
So what are the structures that you need to have in place for the hunters, and what are the structures you need to have in place for the farmers?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We could get really deep into how do you manage, what KPIs are you looking at? What are the expectations for each? But I think even more important than that, you asked me the question of how do you determine? And it's hard because not everyone knows what they are, especially those that think they can do both really well. And I think it's important to say, look, I don't not believe that people can do both well. There are absolutely people that can do both, but they are naturally one or the other. I do believe that, right? There's not a lion running around out there at the zoo with stripes. So I do believe they're two different ones. I love the psychological questions of like, would you rather host a party or attend a party? So that is a question that I've asked people before in trying to help get to the bottom of this, to answer the question on, well, what does that mean? Like, how do you answer, right? If you say that you would rather host a party, you are generally an account manager because you like, hear me out. So you like the attention to detail, getting the list together, organizing the event, making sure you're walking around and diligently talking to every single person, following up after. The hunters just want to be there and have a whole bunch of fun and not worry about any of the details. So That's one way and one question that I've asked. It's not foolproof. I have asked that question before. But I also just say, like, what gets you excited in the sales process? When you think about from very start to all the way to the end, talk to me about one of your biggest wins or biggest successes on an account that you landed. And I see what they start to point out. If they talk about that prospecting, that hunting phase, then I dig in further to that. If they start talking about, we acquired them and they were small, but I was able to expand them, or the relationship I had with the end user or something like that, then I start to dive down that way a little bit more.
Okay. Our audience could not see me looking really puzzled when Stephanie was speaking because we're audio only. But I'm a hunter, but I would much rather host the party because I want to be in charge.
So I will say, Wendy, that's the one thing. So I'll ask if someone says, I want to host the party, I'll say, interesting, why? And if they say, I want to be in control of how everyone's enjoying, I will dive deeper. So okay. I will say it's a good opener, but not foolproof.
Okay. Yeah. Because then I can delegate. So
yes. So you're still getting rid of them details.
Yeah, I'm getting rid of the details as fast as I just jettison them, as fast as I can.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah. So what are some of the structures? Because what I see a lot is businesses that say, "Oh, we're going to hire a salesperson," and I go, "Great. What do you have in place for them?" And the answer is almost always nothing.
Yeah,
they're a people person.
Yeah.
So what do you need to have in place for the hunters or the farmers?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they're all too different when you think about what do you need in place when you start bringing in salespeople. The first thing is you need deal data, like you do, and that's for a business. So take the sales perspective off for a moment. You do need deal data. In order to get deal data, they have to be able to log their stuff somewhere. The reason you need deal data is deal data fuels a very strong annual revenue forecast. And if your annual revenue forecast sucks, or it's one of those like put your finger in the wind and see how things are turning, then your OTEs are not going to be good for your team. So ultimately, it's the best thing for a salesperson is to have great deal data. So give them the opportunity to put it somewhere. Even if you don't have it yet, small bits will help them build. So things like logging their first discovery meeting, right? Making sure you have alignment on what is that first stage that you're tracking. If it's an SQL, fine, right? But whatever that is, tracking that through and being very diligent on opportunity movement. I know that's the RevOps side of me, but I've seen if you have the data, you have a story to build what is actually possible in revenue and not a dream. So I think that that's important. Give them that ability to get a good forecast. So I love that. Give them some tools to be able to do their job, right? They don't have to be big, fancy, expensive ones, but they need to be things that help enable them. If they're required to be high velocity, high volume meetings, then give them a recorder, right? Something like an AI notes meeting tool. They're cheap out there right now, but help them be efficient. And ultimately, for a very short period of time, you can have a salesperson report to a non-sales leader, but I heavily advise as soon as possible to get a sales manager in there that truly is a sales leader, not a superstar sales individual contributor, but someone that understands how to motivate, train, and hold their team accountable so that they can be successful. I often find a CEO that maybe had a very small amount of sales experience thinks that they can lead that sales team for a long period of time, but the CEO has a bigger job than that. They need to run the business. They need to cast vision for the company. They cannot be a full-time sales manager and a full-time CEO. So that's another thing that I find to be really, really important. And I could keep going, but those are some of the things like on a structure standpoint, how do you start setting them up? I would also say really start to give them attainable goals for each. They are different roles. They require different KPIs and goals. So if you separate the roles, they should have different expectations and they should have different comp plans. And so you need to think through what behaviors are we trying to incentivize for each role and make sure that you're building comp plans that associate with that.
Okay. And what about things, because I am a hunter and I teach people to hunt,
Yeah.
the things I always want to see in place for the hunters that have been hired are
Yeah.
things like certainly a CRM, but what about like scripts, messaging, clear definition of what the target is,
Yes.
those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think my intent on that is that sales manager hire should be doing that full time, especially if it's the first couple hires. What else is that sales manager doing other than supporting their team with really clear messaging, differentiation? What is our solution statement, right? How do we go about differentiating ourselves from the competition? As I mentioned, differentiation. How do we position ourselves in the market? They might not even have an ICP yet, right? In the organization, who is that ideal client and how do we go after them? So making that, right? And creating that. And in a small team, what I love is doing it alongside the sales team, not in a silo on your own, in a closed, manager office. So they get to be a part as some founding salespeople. How do we build this? Did you try this? Did it work? If not, let's change it and really starting to create that playbook together.
Absolutely. I love our conversation. You'll have to put your hand over your heart and promise me you'll come back so that we can do it some more. But in the meantime, if people want to connect with you, Stephanie, where should they go?
Yes, I am very active on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you. So please reach out to me there. I will be sure that if you message me, I'll message you back.
And she will. And we are going to put Stephanie's LinkedIn link in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link, connect with Stephanie. And you have been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders with my special guest, Stephanie Valenti. And if you have found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one sales leader, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to today's podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.